I returned from a 4-year military deployment overseas to find my family homestead razed to the ground by an overzealous HOA, only to discover they'd sold my property to luxury condo developers without realizing my great-grandfather's century-old land grant meant I legally owned not just my plot but the entire township. As documents emerged from county archives, showing my name on deeds the developers had never seen, I wondered just how far Elliot Chambers and his board of directors would go when they realized they'd chosen the wrong veteran to cross. The taxi crunched over gravel as we turned onto Willow Creek Lane, the road I'd grown up on. After 48 hours of travel from my final posting in Afghanistan, my body ached for the comfort of my grandfather's old farmhouse. 4 years of deployment with only brief visits home had been tough, but the thought of finally settling back in the family home had kept me going through the darkest days. "This can't be right," I muttered, double-checking the address on my phone. Where my 2-story farmhouse should have stood, surrounded by 3 acres of oak trees and garden, was nothing but flattened earth, construction equipment, and the beginnings of what looked like a foundation for a large building. "This is 1472 Willow Creek," the driver confirmed, looking concerned. "You sure this is your stop, sir?" I stepped out, my duffel bag hitting the dirt with a thud. A large sign declared, "Coming soon, Willow Creek Terraces, luxury condominiums." By Summit Development Group. There must be some mistake, I said to myself, scanning the property in disbelief. The ancient oak my grandfather had hung a tire swing from was gone. The rose garden my mother had planted was bulldozed. Everything erased. A construction foreman approached, clipboard in hand. "Sir, this is a closed construction site. You can't be here." "This is my property," I replied, my voice steady despite the shock. "Captain James Marshall. I've been deployed overseas. What happened to my house?" The foreman's face showed confusion, then sympathy. "Look, I don't know anything about that. This land was purchased legally by Summit Development 3 months ago. You should talk to them or the Pine Valley HOA. They handled the sale." My neighbor, Mrs. Abernathy, came rushing across the street, her face a picture of distress. "James, oh, thank God you're home. I've been trying to reach you for months." She embraced me tightly, then pulled back, her eyes watering. "They said you'd abandoned the property. The HOA put liens on it for supposed violations, unmowed lawn, peeling paint, structural issues. When no one responded to their notices, they foreclosed and sold it to Summit." "That's impossible," I said, pulling out my phone to show her emails. "I arranged for a service to maintain the property. I paid all the bills in advance." "The service came twice and then stopped," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "The HOA claimed they were denied access for inspections. It all happened so fast." The foreman, looking increasingly uncomfortable, excused himself as another vehicle pulled up. A sleek, black SUV parked beside the taxi, and a man in an expensive suit emerged, speaking animatedly into his phone. "I don't care what the surveys say. We're already behind schedule. Just make it work," he barked before ending the call. He spotted us and approached with a practiced smile. "Can I help you folks? This is a closed site." "This is Elliot Chambers," Mrs. Abernathy whispered, "the new HOA president. He pushed through all the changes in the neighborhood." "Mr. Chambers," I stepped forward, extending my hand. "Captain James Marshall, I believe you've torn down my house and are building on my property." Chambers' smile faltered only slightly as he shook my hand. "Captain, thank you for your service, But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. This property was legally acquired through proper channels. The previous owner abandoned it. I am the owner, I stated firmly. I've been deployed with the Army Corps of Engineers. All my tax payments and utilities were up to date. Chambers checked his watch impatiently. Listen, Captain, I sympathize with your situation, but the legal processes were followed. Notices were posted. Hearings were held. The property was in violation of multiple HOA covenants. I was never notified, I insisted. Notifications were sent to the address on file, he replied smoothly. If you weren't there to receive them, that's unfortunate, but not our responsibility. If you'd like to dispute this, I suggest you contact our HOA attorney. Mrs. Abernathy stepped forward, indignation overcoming her usual reserve. That's not true, Elliot. The whole neighborhood told you James was serving overseas. My husband brought it up at 3 different meetings. Chambers. Expression hardened. The board voted unanimously, Margaret. The procedure was followed to the letter. I noticed something odd behind Chambers, workers carefully extracting what looked like an old metal box from near where our family well had once been. What are they digging up over there? I asked, pointing. Chambers turned, then quickly stepped. To block my view. Just some old infrastructure we need to remove. Now I really must insist you leave the premises. This is private property. It's my property, I repeated, a strange calm settling over me. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. Remember, Jamie, what's buried stays buried. The truth about this land is in the box beneath the well. I'd always thought it was just another of his cryptic sayings. Now I wasn't so sure. Security, Chambers called to a uniformed guard. Please escort these people off the property. As we were led away, Mrs. Abernathy gripped my arm. James, there's something you should know. Before they started digging, I saw people from the county archives here. They found something in the records about your family's land, something that made them very nervous. I looked back at my destroyed homestead, at the workers extracting the metal box, at Chambers barking orders into his phone. Don't worry, Mrs. Abernathy, I said quietly. I think I know exactly what they found, and Mr. Chambers has no idea what he's gotten himself into. Mrs. Abernathy insisted I stay with her and her husband while I sorted out the situation. Their spare bedroom was small but comfortable, though I spent that first night wide awake, my mind racing through options. By morning, I had a plan. The county records office opens at 9, I told Mrs. Abernathy over coffee. I need to see what documents they pulled before my deployment. Mr. Abernathy, a retired history teacher, looked up from his newspaper. James, there's something odd about this whole situation. Elliot Chambers moved here just last year, and suddenly he's HOA president. Then Summit Development appears out of nowhere interested specifically in your property. Frank thinks they're connected, Mrs. Abernathy explained. Summit's CEO, Victor Harrington, was seen playing golf with Chambers multiple times before all. This started, I wasn't surprised. The Corps taught me to follow the money. First stop, county records. Then I need to check what was in that metal box they dug up. The county records building was a stone structure downtown, one of the few original buildings from Pine Valley's founding in 1887. Inside, I approached a clerk whose nameplate read, Denise. Good morning, I began. I'm researching property records for 1472 Willow Creek Lane. I understand someone from your office recently visited the site. Denise looked uncomfortable. I'm not at liberty to discuss specific research requests. I slid my military ID across the counter. I'm Captain James Marshall. That property has been in my family for generations until it was wrongfully sold. I'm just trying to understand what happened." Her expression softened. "Let me get Ms. Rodriguez. She handled that research." A few minutes later, a woman in her 50s with steel-rimmed glasses approached. "Captain Marshall, I'm Elena Rodriguez, county historian. Please come to my office." Once inside, she closed the door. "I was wondering when you'd show up. This situation has bothered me for months." "You know about the sale of my property?" She nodded gravely. "It didn't feel right. I tried contacting you when Summit requested historical documentation for your land." Elena pulled a thick file from her cabinet. "The Marshall property has unusual historical significance. Your great-grandfather, Colonel William Marshall, was granted that land, and considerably more, after the Spanish-American War. The government was grateful for his service." She spread out a yellowed map on her desk. I leaned forward, studying it carefully. The map showed Pine Valley Township in 1898, with a large area outlined in red. "This was the original land grant," Elena explained. "Over 500 acres, encompassing what's now the entire central township of Pine Valley." I pointed to handwritten notes in the margin. "What's this?" "That's the interesting part. The grant included unusual provisions. While your family sold parcels over time, the original grant maintained specific mineral and development rights for all the land. Furthermore, there's a reversion clause." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, my heart quickening. "In simple terms, if any development occurs without proper notification to the Marshall family trustee, that's you, the ownership of those developed parcels legally reverts to the original estate." I sat back, stunned. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that when Summit Development broke ground without your explicit approval as trustee of the Marshall estate, they triggered the reversion clause on not just your 3 acres, but potentially every parcel they're developing in the township center. Does Summit know this?" Elena shook her head. "I don't think so. When I discovered this during my research, I immediately called the county attorney. He ordered me to provide only the basic deed information Summit requested, not the full historical record." "Why would he do that?" "Politics," she said grimly. "Victor Harrington has connections on the county board, but I kept copies of everything." She handed me a USB drive. "All the records are here. I've been waiting for you to return." I thanked her profusely. As I turned to leave, she called after me. "Captain Marshall, there's one more thing. That metal box they found near your well, it likely contains your great-grandfather's original documents and possibly the ceremonial key to the township that was presented to him. Those items would further establish the historical validity of the grant conditions." Armed with this information, I headed to the only law firm in town, Pearson and Davis. Thomas Pearson had been my grandfather's attorney, though he'd retired years ago. His daughter Michaela now ran the practice. "James Marshall," she greeted me warmly. "Dad told me you were overseas. What brings you back?" I explained the situation, showing her the USB drive from Elena. Michaela's expression grew increasingly serious as she reviewed the documents. "This is extraordinary," she said finally. "The reversion clause is ironclad, written in an era when contracts had real teeth, and it's never been challenged or superseded. What does this mean for Summit's development?" "It means," she said, with a slight smile, "that they're building on land they don't legally own, and they've triggered a clause that could put the entire township center back in your control. But we need those original documents to make the strongest case." My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Abernathy. Emergency HOA meeting called for tonight, 7 p.m., Community Center. Subject, Marshall property complications. You need to be there. I showed Michaela the message. Looks like they found something that scared them. She gathered the papers decisively. Let's give them something more to worry about. I'll prepare an emergency injunction against further development. We file it first. Thing tomorrow morning. And tonight? Tonight, she said with determination, we crash an HOA meeting. The Pine Valley Community Center buzzed with tension as residents filed in for the emergency meeting. Elliot Chambers stood at the front, huddled with 3 men in expensive suits. Summit. Executives, I guessed, and a nervous-looking man clutching a leather portfolio, who I later learned was Gerald Wilson, the HOA attorney. Michaela and I slipped into seats in the back row. Mrs. Abernathy spotted us and gave an encouraging nod from across the room. Let's just listen first, Michaela whispered. See what they know. Chambers called the meeting to order at precisely 7 p.m., his voice carrying the artificial confidence of someone trying to control a situation rapidly spinning beyond his grasp. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, he began. We've encountered some unexpected documentation issues with the Summit Development Project. I want to assure everyone that these are minor complications that won't affect property values or the community's future growth. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Chambers nodded to Wilson, who nervously approached the podium. During routine title research, we've discovered some historical encumbrances on certain properties within the development zone, Wilson explained, adjusting his glasses. Nothing to be concerned about. These are common with properties of this age. Summit Development is working with county officials to resolve these matters expeditiously. An elderly man in the front row raised his hand. What kind of encumbrances are we talking about? Wilson glanced at Chambers, who gave a slight nod. There appears to be an outdated land grant with some unusual provisions. These types of centuries-old claims are typically invalidated by modern zoning laws. That's not entirely accurate, a new voice called from the doorway. The crowd turned to see Elena Rodriguez entering, carrying a stack of documents. The Marshall land grant has never been invalidated, and its provisions were reaffirmed by the State Supreme Court in 1976. Chambers' face flushed with anger. Ms. Rodriguez, this is a private homeowners association meeting. You're not a resident. I'm here in my official capacity as county historian, she replied calmly, making her way to the front. When public records are being mischaracterized, I have both the right and obligation to correct the record. One of the Summit executives, a silver-haired man with an imposing presence, stepped forward. I'm Victor Harrington, CEO of Summit Development. Let's be clear about what's happening. We've invested millions in this project based on clean title searches provided by the county. If there are discrepancies, they're the county's responsibility, not ours. Elena stood her ground. Mr. Harrington, your company was provided with documentation indicating the need for approval from the Marshall Estate trustee. You chose to proceed without securing that approval. The room erupted in confused conversations. Chambers banged his gavel repeatedly. Order! This is exactly why we're addressing this now, before rumors spread. The situation is under control. I decided it was time. Standing up, I felt every eye in the room turned toward me. My name is Captain James Marshall. My family has owned property in Pine Valley for over 120 years. I've recently returned from military deployment to find my home demolished without my knowledge or consent. Chambers' expression hardened. Captain Marshall has already been informed that the property was legally obtained following his abandonment and HOA violations. There was no abandonment, I countered, moving toward the front. I was serving my country and every bill was paid. The violations were manufactured after you prevented my maintenance service from accessing the property. That's ridiculous, Chambers scoffed. We followed all proper procedures. Michaela stood up next to me. I'm Michaela Pearson, Captain Marshall's attorney. I've reviewed all documentation related to this matter. The HOA's actions violated multiple state laws protecting deployed service members. That alone would be troubling enough. She paused, letting her words sink in. But the more serious issue is what happened when Summit began excavation. The discovery of historical artifacts and documents that Mr. Chambers and Mr. Harrington have deliberately concealed from this community. Victor Harrington stepped forward aggressively. These accusations are outrageous and potentially libelous. What documents? Someone shouted from the crowd. Others joined in, demanding answers. I raised my voice above the commotion. A metal box was uncovered near my family's well yesterday. That box contains my great-grandfather's original land grant and the ceremonial key to Pine Valley Township. Those items prove that my family hasn't just owned that 3-acre plot. We hold specific rights to the entire original township. The room fell silent. Then Gerald Wilson, the HOA attorney, spoke up unexpectedly. It's true. The box contained documents that complicate the development plans. That's why we called this meeting. Victor Harrington turned on Wilson. What are you doing? My job, Wilson replied, his voice steadier now. As counsel to this HOA, I have to advise them of legal realities. The Marshall grant includes a reversion clause that's been triggered by this development. Chambers looked like he might explode. This is absurd. 100-year-old piece of paper can't stop progress. Actually, Elena interjected, placing documents on the table, it can and it does. The Marshall grant was specifically structured to ensure family oversight of township development in perpetuity. This wasn't just any land grant. Colonel William Marshall founded Pine Valley. The township exists because of him. Mrs. Abernathy stood up. I remember when James's grandfather would tell stories about his father helping to build the original town hall. The Marshalls have always been good stewards of this land. Victor Harrington's phone buzzed. He checked it, his face darkening. This meeting is over. Summit's legal team will address these claims in the proper venue, court. He stormed out, followed by his colleagues. Chambers tried desperately to regain control. Please, everyone remain calm. This doesn't affect your individual properties. The HOA will... Actually, Michaela interrupted, it affects every property within the original township boundaries that's been developed without Marshall family approval, including, she added pointedly, your recently renovated vacation homes. At Pine Lake, Mr. Chambers and Mrs. Foster, the HOA treasurer, Diane Foster, went pale. My lakefront property, what are you saying? I'm saying, I answered, that we need to have a very different conversation about the future of Pine Valley, one that respects its history and the law. The community center erupted into chaos as homeowners bombarded Chambers with questions. His attempts to adjourn the meeting fell on deaf ears as residents demanded answers about their properties and the implications of the Marshall land grant. Michaela touched my arm. We need those original documents. Without them, this becomes a much harder legal battle. I nodded, scanning the room, until I spotted a familiar face, Ryan Chen, my childhood friend, who now worked security at Summit's construction sites. He was standing awkwardly by the door, clearly uncomfortable with the unfolding drama. I made my way over to him. "Ryan," I said quietly. "Good to see you, man." His eyes widened with recognition. "James, when did you get back? I had no idea. Just yesterday. Listen, that metal box they dug up at my place. Any idea where they took it?" Ryan glanced around nervously. "It's in Harrington's office at the Summit trailer on site. He wouldn't let anyone else handle it." "Thanks, Ryan. We should catch up soon." He grabbed my arm. "James, be careful. Harrington's been acting strange since they found that box. Security's been doubled at the site." As I returned to Michaela, Gerald Wilson approached us, looking ashen. "Captain Marshall, Ms. Pearson, we should talk privately." We followed him to a small office off the main hall. Once inside, Wilson loosened his tie and collapsed into a chair. "I didn't know," he said immediately. "When Chambers hired me last year, he presented everything as routine HOA business. The foreclosure on your property followed procedural guidelines on paper. I never verified the underlying claims." "That's negligence, counselor," Michaela replied coolly. Wilson nodded miserably. "I know, but when they found that box yesterday, and I saw the documents inside..." He removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes. "The land grant is legitimate. The reversion clause is enforceable. I told Chambers and Harrington this morning, but they instructed me to make it go away." "And now?" I asked. "Now I'm recusing myself as HOA counsel and providing you with this." He handed me a flash drive. Photos I took of the documents before Harrington confiscated them. Not admissible in court, but they'll show you exactly what you're looking for. I pocketed the drive. "Why help us now?" Wilson's face hardened. "Because Harrington mentioned destroying the originals. That's not just unethical, it's criminal. I won't be part of it." Back in the main hall, the meeting had devolved into smaller arguments throughout the room. Chambers was surrounded by angry homeowners, while Diane Foster sat alone, frantically making calls. Mrs. Abernathy approached with a short, distinguished-looking man in tow. "James, this is Judge Robert Sinclair. He'd like a word." The judge extended his hand. "Captain Marshall, my grandfather served with your great-grandfather. When Margaret mentioned what was happening, I had to come. The Sinclairs were the second family to settle here," Mrs. Abernathy explained. Judge Sinclair nodded. "The Marshall and Sinclair families built Pine Valley together. What's happening now? It's not right. I've made some calls. The county commissioner is convening an emergency session tomorrow morning. I suggest you be there." "We will," Michaela promised. "But first, we need to secure those original documents before they mysteriously disappear." Outside, the night air was cool as we walked to Michaela's car. "We need a plan to retrieve that box," I said. "Already working on it," she replied, sending a rapid series of texts. "My brother's a detective with the sheriff's department. He's requesting an emergency warrant based on the historical significance of the artifacts. If Harrington destroys those documents, he'll face federal charges." As we drove toward the Abernathy's house, I connected Wilson's flash drive to my phone. The images showed exactly what Elena had described: the original land grant, signed by the governor in 1898, the ceremonial key to the township, and a leather-bound journal with my great-grandfather's flowing handwriting. The final photo made my breath catch, a detailed map of Pine Valley with inscriptions marking natural resources beneath the surface. "Michaela, look at this." I showed her the image at a stoplight. There are mineral deposits marked all over the township. Copper, iron, and something labeled RE. "Rare earth elements," she whispered. "James, this could be why they're so interested in this land. Rare earth minerals are crucial for electronics, renewable energy. They're worth billions. And my family has held the mineral rights all this time, which Harrington and Chambers somehow discovered. That's why they targeted your property first. They needed to establish ownership to access what's underneath." When we arrived at the Abernathy's, Michaela's phone rang. Her expression grew serious as she listened. "When?" she asked. "Are you sure?" "Yes, we'll be right there." She hung up, turning to me with urgency. That was my brother. "There's a fire at the Summit construction office. Emergency services are responding now." My stomach dropped. "The documents. We need to go. Now." We sped toward my former property, the night sky already glowing orange with flames. Fire trucks lined Willow Creek Lane, their lights casting eerie shadows as firefighters battled the blaze engulfing the construction trailer. Detective Mark Pearson met us behind the police line. "Construction security called it in 20 minutes ago," he explained. "Supposedly an electrical fire, but my guys report it started in Harrington's office." "Convenient," Michaela muttered. "Too convenient," her brother agreed. The warrant came. Through 5 minutes before the fire was reported, Harrington was seen leaving the site just before the alarm. I watched the flames consuming what might be the only proof of my claim. "Can anything be salvaged?" Mark shook his head grimly. "Fire's too intense. They're focusing on containment now." As we stood watching the destruction, a county sheriff's vehicle pulled up. The door opened and Sheriff Dalton stepped out, followed by Elena Rodriguez and a man I didn't recognize carrying evidence bags. Elena spotted us and hurried over, her face flushed with excitement despite the circumstances. "Captain Marshall, we got them." "Got what?" I asked, confusion mixing with hope. "The documents," Sheriff Dalton explained, approaching our group. "Ms. Rodriguez alerted us this afternoon about their historical significance. When the warrant came through, I sent Deputy Hayes to execute it immediately. He removed the items 10 minutes before the fire started." The deputy held up the evidence bags, which clearly contained the metal box and its contents. Harrington arrived. "As I was leaving," Deputy Hayes added. "He seemed shocked to see me, said he needed to retrieve some important papers. When I told him I had a warrant for the historical artifacts, he became agitated, claiming they were Summit property." Mark grinned. "Let me guess, he went inside anyway after you left?" Hayes nodded. "I watched from down the street. 5 minutes later he drove away. 5 minutes after that, the fire alarm sounded." "Attempting to destroy evidence?" Sheriff Dalton said gravely. "That's a felony." As we processed this turn of events, a news van pulled up. A reporter I recognized from the local station approached with a camera operator. "Captain Marshall," she called out. "Lisa Chen from Channel 8 News. We received an anonymous tip about historical artifacts being recovered from a burning construction site. Can you comment on rumors that you might legally own most of Pine Valley Township? This powerful story shows how quickly everything you've worked for can be taken away, but also how uncovering your true power can transform disaster into opportunity." If you enjoyed this story of a veteran who returned home to find his property sold by a greedy HOA, only to discover he legally owned the entire township, Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads featuring stories of justice, redemption, and unexpected twists. A fate that will leave you inspired. What would you do if you discovered you owned more than you ever imagined? Share your thoughts in the comments below and stay tuned for next week's video where we explore another shocking story. My neighbor built a fence on my property, then a survey revealed a $2 million secret underneath.